Autobiography of Parley P. Pratt, Chapter 22, October 31st, 1838. In the afternoon, we were informed that the governor had ordered this force against us, with orders to exterminate or drive every Mormon from the state. As soon as these facts were ascertained, we determined not to resist anything in the shape of authority, however abused. We had now nothing to do but to submit to be massacred, driven, robbed, or plundered at the option of our persecutors. Colonel George M. Hinkle, who was at the time the highest officer of the militia assembled for the defense of Far West, waited on Mazers, Joseph Smith, Sidney Rigdon, Hiram Smith, Lehman White, George Robinson, and myself with a request from General Lucas that we would repair to his camp with the assurance that as soon as peaceable arrangements could be entered into, we should be released. We had no confidence in the word of a murderer and robber, but there was no alternative but to put ourselves into the hands of such monsters, or to have the city attacked and men, women, and children massacred. We therefore commended ourselves to the Lord, and voluntarily surrendered as sheep into the hands of wolves. As we approached the camp of the enemy, General Lucas rode out to meet us with a guard of several hundred men. The haughty general rode up, and without speaking to us, instantly ordered his guard to surround us. They did so very abruptly, and we were marched into camp, surrounded by thousands of savage-looking beings, many of whom were dressed and painted like Indian warriors. These all set up a constant yell, like so many bloodhounds let loose upon their prey, as if they had achieved one of the most miraculous victories that ever graced the annals of the world. In the division of the infernal regions could suddenly open to the mind. If the visions of the infernal regions could suddenly open to the mind, with thousands of malicious fiends all clamoring, exulting, deriding, blaspheming, mocking, railing, raging, and foaming like a troubled sea, then could some idea be formed of the hell which we had entered. In camp we were placed under a strong guard and were without shelter during the night, lying on the ground in the open air in the midst of a great rain. The guards, during the whole night, kept up a constant tirade of mockery and the most obscene blackguardism and abuse. They blasphemed God, mocked Jesus Christ, swore the most dreadful oaths, turned Brother Joseph and others, taunted Brother Joseph and others, demanded miracles, wanted signs, such as, "Come, Mr. Smith, show us an angel. Give us one of your revelations. Show us a miracle. Come, there is one of our brethren here in camp, whom we took prisoner yesterday in his own house and knocked his brains out with his own rifle." There is one of your brethren here in camp whom we took prisoner yesterday in his own house and knocked his brains out with his own rifle, which we found hanging over his fireplace. He lies speechless and dying. Speak the word and heal him, and then we will all believe. Or, if you are apostles or men of God, deliver yourselves, and then we will be Mormons. Next would be a volley of oaths and blasphemies, then a tumultuous tirade of lewd boastings of having defiled virgins and wives by force, much of which I dare not write, and indeed language would fail me to attempt more than a faint description. Thus passed this dreadful night, and before morning several other captives were added to our number, among whom was brother Amasa Lehman. We were informed that the general officers held a secret council during most of the night, which was dignified by the name of court-martial, in which without a hearing, or without even being brought before it, we were all sentenced to be shot. The day and hour was also appointed for the execution of this sentence, namely, next morning at 8 o'clock in the public square at Far West. Of this we were informed by Brigadier General Donovan, who was one of the council, but who was violently opposed to this cold-blooded murder, and he assured the council that he would revolt and withdraw his whole brigade and march them back to Clay County as soon as it was light, if they persisted in so dreadful an undertaking. Said he, "It is cold-blooded murder, and I wash my hands of it." His firm remonstrance, and that of a few others, so alarmed the haughty murderer and his accomplices that they dared not put the decree in execution. Thus, through a merciful providence of God, our lives were spared through that dreadful night. It was the common talk and even the boast in the camp that individuals lay here and there unburied where they had shot them down for sport. The females they had ravished, the plunder they had taken, the houses they had burned, the horses they had stolen, the fields of grain they had laid waste, were common topics and were dwelt on for mere amusement, or as if these deeds were a stepping stone to office. And it is a fact that such deeds were so considered. No pen need undertake to describe our feelings during that terrible night, while there confined, not knowing the fate of our wives and children, or of our fellow saints, and seeing no way for our own lives to be saved except by the miraculous power of God. But notwithstanding all earthly hopes were gone, still we felt a calmness indescribable. A secret whispering to our inmost soul seemed to say, "Peace, my sons, be of good cheer. Your work is not yet done. Therefore, I will restrain your enemies, that they shall not have power to take your lives." While thus confined, William E. McClellan, once my fellow laborer in the gospel, but now a Judas with hostile weapon in hand to destroy the saints, came to me and observed, "Well, Parley, you have now got where you are certain never to escape. How do you feel as to the course you have taken in religion?" I answered that I had taken that course which I should take if I had my life to live over again. He seemed thoughtful for a moment and then replied, "Well, I think if I were you, I should die as I had lived. At any rate, I see no possibility of escape for you and your friends." Next morning, General Lucas demanded the Caldwell militia to give up their arms, which was done. As soon as the troops who had defended the city were disarmed, it was surrounded by the enemy and all the men detained as prisoners. None was permitted to pass out of the city. although their families were starving for want of sustenance. The mills and provisions being some distance from the city. The brutal mob was now turned loose to ravage, steal, plunder, and murder without restraint. Houses were rifled, women ravished, and goods taken as they pleased. The whole troop, together with their horses, lived on the grain and provisions, while cattle were shot down for mere sport, and sometimes men, women, and children fared no better. On the third morning after our imprisonment, we were placed in a wagon in order for removal. Many of the more desperate then crowded around, cocked their rifles, and singling us out, presented them to our breasts, and swore they would blow us through. Some guns were snapped, but misfired, and the rest were in a small degree restrained by the officers, and we still lived. We were now marched to far west under the conduct of the whole army, and while they halted in the public square, we were permitted to go with a guard for a change of linen and take final leave of our families, in order to depart as prisoners to Jackson County, a distance of 60 miles. This was the most trying scene of all. I went to my house, being guarded by 2 or 3 soldiers. The cold rain was pouring down without, and on entering my little cottage, there lay my wife sick of a fever, with which she had been for some time confined. At her breast was our son Nathan, an infant of 3 months, and by her side a little girl of 5 years. On the foot of the same bed lay a woman in travail, who had been driven from her house in the night and had taken momentary shelter in my hut of 10 feet square. My larger house having been torn down, I stepped to the bed. My wife burst into tears. I spoke a few words of comfort, telling her to try to live for my sake and the children's, and expressing a hope that we should meet again, though years might separate us. She promised to try to live. I then embraced and kissed the little babes and departed. Till now I had refrained from weeping, but to be forced from so helpless a family, who were destitute of provisions and fuel and deprived almost of shelter in a bleak prairie, with none to assist them, exposed to lawless bandits who were utter strangers to humanity, and this, at the approach of winter, was more than nature could well endure. I went to General Moses Wilson in tears and stated the circumstances of my sick, heartbroken, and destitute family in terms which would have moved any heart that had a latent spark of humanity yet remaining, but I was only answered with an exultant laugh and a taunt of reproach by this hardened murderer. As I returned from my house toward the troops in the square, I halted with the guard at the door of Hiram Smith, and heard the sobs and groans of his wife at his parting words. She was then near confinement, and needed more than ever the comfort and consolation of a husband's presence. As we returned to the wagon, we saw Sidney Rigdon taking leave of his wife and daughters, who stood at a little distance in tears of anguish indescribable. In the wagon sat Joseph Smith, while his aged father and venerable mother came up, overwhelmed with tears, and took each of the prisoners by the hand, with a silence of grief too great for utterance. In the meantime, hundreds of the brethren crowded around us, anxious to take a parting look or a silent shake of the hand, for feelings were too intense to allow of speech. In the midst of these scenes, orders were given, and we moved slowly away, under the conduct of General Wilson and his whole brigade. A march of 12 miles brought us to Crooked River, where we camped for the night. Here, General Wilson began to treat us more kindly. He became very sociable, conversing very freely on the subject of his former murders and robberies committed against us in Jackson. He did not pretend to deny anything, but spoke up the whole as freely as if he had been giving the history of other ages or countries in which his audience had no personal concern. Said he, "We Jackson County boys know how it is, therefore have not the extremes of hatred and prejudice which characterize the rest of the troops. We know perfectly that from the beginning the Mormons have not been the aggressors at all. As it began in '33 in Jackson County, so it has been ever since. The Mormons were crowded to the last extreme and compelled to self-defense, and this has been construed into treason, murder, and plunder. We mob you without law. The authorities refuse to protect you according to law. You then are compelled to protect yourselves, and we act upon the prejudices of the public, who join our forces, and the whole is legalized for your destruction and our gain. Is not this a shrewd and cunning policy on our part, gentlemen? When we drove you from Jackson County, we burned 203 of your houses, plundered your goods, destroyed your press, type, paper, books, office, and all, tarred and feathered old Bishop Partridge, as exemplary an old man as you can find anywhere. We shot down some of your men, and if any of you returned fire, we imprisoned you on your trial for murder. Shrewdly done, gentlemen, and I came near kicking the bucket myself, for on one occasion, while we were tearing down houses, driving families, and destroying and plundering goods, some of you good folks put a ball through my son's body, another through the arm of my clerk, and a third pierced my shirt collar and marked my neck. No blame, gentlemen. We deserved it, and let a set of men serve me as your community has been served. And I'll be damned if I would not fight till I died." It was repeatedly insinuated by the other officers and troops that we should hang you prisoners on the first tree we came to on the way to independence. But I'll be damned if anybody shall hurt you. We just intend to exhibit you in independence, that the people look at you and see what a damned set of fine fellows you are, and more particularly to keep you from that damn old bigot of a General Clark and his troops, from down country, who are so stuffed with lies and prejudice that they would shoot you down in a moment. Such was the tenor of the conversation addressed by General Wilson to his prisoners. Indeed, it was now evident that he was proud of his prey and felt highly enthusiastic in having the honor of returning in triumph to independence with his prisoners, whom his superstition had magnified into something more than fellow citizens, something noble or supernatural and worthy of public exhibition. As we arose and commenced our march on the morning of the 3rd of November, Joseph Smith spoke to me and the other prisoners in a low but cheerful and confidential tone. He said, "Be of good cheer, brethren. The word of the Lord came to me last night that our lives should be given us, and that whatever we may suffer during this captivity, not one of our lives should be taken. Of this prophecy I testify in the name of the Lord, and though spoken in secret, its public fulfillment and the miraculous escape of each one of us is too notorious to need my testimony." In the after part of the day, we came to the Missouri River, which separated us from Jackson County. Here the brigade was halted and the prisoners taken to a public house, where we were permitted to shave, change our linen, and partake of some refreshment. This done, we were hurried to the ferry and across the river with the utmost haste in advance of the troops. This movement was soon explained to us. The truth was, General Clark had now arrived near the scene of action and had sent an express to take us from General Wilson and prevent us from going to Jackson County, both armies being competitors for the honor of possessing the wonderful, or, in their estimation, royal prisoners. Clark and his troops, for a distance, who had not arrived in the city of Far West till after our departure, were desirous of seeing the strange men whom it was said had turned the world upside down, and of possessing such a wonderful trophy of victory, or of putting them to death themselves. On the other hand, Wilson and his brigade were determined to exhibit us through the streets of Independence as a viable token of their achievements. Therefore, when demanded by General Clark's express, they refused to surrender us and hurried us across the ferry with all possible dispatch. Marching about a mile, we encamped for the night in the wilderness with about 50 troops for our guard, the remainder not crossing the ferry till the next morning. Some of the neighboring citizens visited us next morning, it being Sunday. One of the ladies came up and very candidly inquired of the troops which of the prisoners the Mormons worshipped. One of the guards pointed to Mr. Smith with a significant smile. Pointing to Mr. Smith with a significant smile, said, "This is he." The woman then, turning to Mr. Smith, inquired whether he professed to be the Lord and Savior. Do not smile, gentle reader, at the ignorance of these poor innocent creatures who, by the exertions of a corrupt press and pulpit, were kept in ignorance and made to believe in every possible absurdity in relation to the Church of the Saints. Mr. Smith replied that he professed to be nothing but a man and a minister of salvation, sent by Jesus Christ to preach the gospel. After expressing some surprise, the lady inquired what was the particular nature of the gospel, as held by himself and his church. At this, the visitors and soldiers gathered around, and Mr. Smith preached to them faith in the Lord Jesus Christ, repentance toward God, reformation of life, immersion in water in the name of Jesus Christ for the remission of sins, and the gift of the Holy Ghost by the laying on of hands. All seemed surprised, and the lady, in tears, went her way, praising God for the truth and praying aloud that the Lord would bless and deliver the prisoners. At 10 o'clock, the brigade had all crossed the river and come up with us. We were then marched forward in our carriages, while the troops were formed into a front and rear guard, with quite a martial appearance. As we passed along through the settlements, hundreds of men, women, and children flocked to see us. General Wilson often halted the whole brigade to introduce us to the populace, pointing out each of us by name. Many shook us by the hand, and in the ladies, at least, there appeared some feelings of human compassion and sympathy. In this way we proceeded till we arrived at Independence. It was now past noon, and in the midst of great rain, but hundreds crowded to witness the procession and to gaze at us as we were paraded in martial triumph through the principal streets, the bugles sounding a blast of triumphant joy.
Chapter 23. This ceremony being finished, a vacant house was prepared for our reception, into which we were ushered through the crowd of spectators that thronged every avenue. The troops were then disbanded. In the meantime, we were kept under a small guard and were treated with some degree of humanity, while hundreds flocked to see us day after day. We spent most of our time in preaching and conversation, explanatory of our doctrines and practice. Much prejudice was removed, and the feelings of the populace began to be in our favor, notwithstanding their former wickedness and hatred. In a day or two, we were at liberty to walk the streets without a guard. We were finally removed from our house of confinement to a hotel, where we boarded at the public table and lodged on the floor with a block of wood for a pillow. We no longer had any guard. We went out and came in when we pleased, a certain keeper being appointed merely to watch over us and look to our wants. With him we walked out of town to the westward and visited the desolate lands of the saints and the people, which 7 years before we had dedicated for the building of a temple. This was a beautiful rise of ground, about half a mile west of the center of Independence. When we saw it last, it was a noble forest, but our enemies had since robbed it of every vestige of timber, and it now lay desolate, or clothed with grass and weeds. Oh, how much feelings did this spot awaken in our bosoms! Here we had often bowed the knee in prayer in bygone years. Here we had assembled with hundreds of happy saints in the solemn meeting and offered our songs and sacraments and orisons. But now all was solemn and lonely desolation. Not a vestige remained to make the spot where stood our former dwellings. Not a vestige remained to mark the spot where stood our former dwellings. They had long since been consumed by fire and removed and converted to the use of our enemies. While at Independence, we were once or twice invited to dine with General Wilson and some others, which we did. While thus sojourning as prisoners at large, I arose one morning when it was very snowy, and passed silently and unmolested out of the hotel, and as no one seemed to notice me or call me in question, I thought I would try an experiment. I passed on eastward through the town. No one noticed me. I then took into the fields, still unobserved. After traveling a mile, I entered a forest. All was gloomy silence. No one was near. The heavens were darkened and obscured by falling snow. My track was covered behind me, and I was free. I knew the way to the states eastward behind me very well, and there seemed nothing to prevent my pursuing my way thither. Thoughts of freedom beat high in my bosom. Wife, children, home, freedom, peace, and a land of law and order all arose in my mind. I could go to other states, send for my family, make me a home, and be happy. On the other hand, I was a prisoner in a state where all law was at an end. I was liable to be shot down at any time without judge or jury. I was liable to be tried for my life by murderous assassins who had already broken every oath of office and trampled on every principle of honor or even humanity. Hands already dripping with the blood of aged sires and of helpless women and children were reaching out for my destruction. The Battle of Crooked River had already been construed into murder on the part of the brave patriots who there defended their lives and rescued their fellow citizens from kidnappers and land pirates, while the pirates themselves had been converted into loyal militia. To go forward was freedom. To go backward was to be sent to General Clark and be accused of the highest crimes, with murderers for judges, jury, and executioners. Go free, whispered the tempter. No, said I, never while Brother Joseph and his fellows are in the power of the enemy. What a storm of trouble, or even of death, it might subject them to. What a storm of trouble, or even of death, it might subject them to. I turned on my heel, retraced my steps, and entered the hotel ere they had missed me. As I shook the snow off my clothes, the keeper and also Brother Joseph inquired where I had been. I replied, just out for a little exercise. A walk for pleasure in such a storm gave rise to some pleasantries on their part. And there the matter ended. There was one thing that buoyed up our spirits continually during our captivity. It was the remembrance of the word of the Lord to Brother Joseph, saying that our lives should all be given us during this captivity, that none of them should be lost. I thought of this while in the wilderness, vacillating whether to go or stay, and the thought struck me, he that will seek to save his life shall lose it, but he that will lose his life for my sake shall find it again, even life eternal. I could now make sure of my part in the first resurrection, as I had so intensely desired when about 11 years old. But, the path of life, how was it beset with trials? At length, after repeated demands, we were sent to General Clark at Richmond, Ray County. Generals Lucas and Wilson had tried in vain for some days to get a guard to accompany us. None would volunteer, and when drafted, they would not obey orders, for in truth, they wished us to go at liberty. At last, a colonel or 2 or 3 officers started with us, with their swords and pistols, which were intended more to protect us than to keep us from escaping. On this journey, some of us rode in carriages and some on horseback. Sometimes we were 60 or 80 rods in front or rear of our guards, who were drinking hard out of bottles that they carried in their pockets. At night, having crossed the Missouri River, we put up at a private house. Here our guards all got drunk and went to bed and to sleep, leaving us their pistols to defend ourselves in case of any attack from without, as we were in a very hostile neighborhood. Next morning we rode a few miles and were met by an express from General Clark, which consisted of 1 Colonel Sterling Price and a guard of soldiers. This company immediately surrounded us with poised pieces, in regular military order, as if we had been Bonaparte and staff on the way to St. Helena, thinking perhaps that if we should escape, the whole United States and all of Europe would be immediately overthrown. In this manner we were escorted to Richmond, the headquarters of General Clark and his army and 3,000 or 4,000 men. Here, as usual, we had to endure the gaze of the curious, as if we had been a caravan of animals for exhibition. Troops were paraded to receive us, which, as we approached, opened to the right and left, thus forming a long avenue through which we passed into a block house, and were immediately put in chains, under a strong guard who stood over us continually with poised pieces, cocked and primed. Colonel Price continued in the superintendence of the prisoners and the guards. General Clark at length called to see us. He seemed more haughty, unfeeling, and reserved than even Lucas or Wilson had been when we first entered their camp. We inquired of the general what were his intentions concerning us. I stated to him that we had now been captives for many days, and we knew not wherefore, nor whether we were considered prisoners of war, or prisoners of civil process, or prisoners of hope, at the same time remarking that all was wrapped in mystery, for, as citizens of the United States and of Missouri in time of peace, we could in no wise be considered as prisoners of war, and without civil process we were not held by civil authority, and, as being prisoners of hope, there was not much chance to hope from our present appearances. He replied that we were taken to be tried. Tried? By what authority? By court-martial. What? Ministers of the gospel tried by court-martial? Court-martial? Men who sustain no office in military affairs and who are not subject by law to military duty? Such men to be tried by court-martial? And this in time of peace, and in a republic where the Constitution guaranteed to every citizen the right of trial by jury? Yes, this is in accordance with the Treaty of Stipulations entered into at Far West at the time of the surrender, and as agreed to by Colonel Hickel, your commanding officer. Colonel Hickel, our commanding officer? What had he to do with our civil rights? He was only a colonel of a regiment of the Caldwell County Militia. Why, was he not the commanding officer of the fortress of Far West, the headquarters of the Mormon forces? We had no fortress or Mormon forces, but were part of the state militia. At this the general seemed surprised, and the conversation ended. We were astonished above measure at proceedings so utterly ignorant and devoid of all law or justice. Here was a major general selected by the governor of Missouri and sent to banish or exterminate a religious society, and then to crown the whole with inconceivable absurdity. Said religious society is converted by this officer and his associates into an independent government or foreign nation. And last, and equally absurd, the state of Missouri assumed her independence of the federal government so far as to treat with this imaginary Mormon empire or foreign nation. A colonel of militia, subordinate to the general then in the field, is converted into a foreign minister, an envoy extraordinary in behalf of the Mormon Empire, to enter into treaty stipulations with His Missouri Majesty's forces under General Lucas, Wilson, and Clark. The city of Far West, the capital of Mormonia, is the Ghent, where this treaty of peace is ratified. The standing army of the conquered nation stacks its arms, which are carried in triumph to Richmond. Preachers of the gospel are converted into noble or royal prisoners, chained to the car of the victorious champions, to be led captive as sport for the Philistines, or to be shot or hung at pleasure, while the residue of the inhabitants of the fallen empire, men, women, and children, are to have their real estate and all their goods confiscated and themselves banished from the state on pain of death. A few, however, are selected from among these exiles to be imprisoned or executed at the mere dictation of a Nero or a Nicholas. Was this in America in the 19th century? Were these scenes transacted in a constitutional republic? Yes, verily, and worse, a tale of horror, of woe, of long years of lawless outrage and tyranny is yet to be told, of which this is a mere stepping stone or entering wedge.
Chapter 24. We here introduce the testimony of Joseph Young, an eyewitness of one of the most awful scenes which ever stained the annals of history in any age or country. The following is a short history of my travels to the state of Missouri, and of a bloody tragedy enacted at Haun's Mill on Shoal Creek, October 30th, 1838. On the 6th of July last, I started with my family from Kirtland, Ohio, for Missouri. The county of Caldwell, in the upper part of the state, being the place of my destination. On the 13th of October, I crossed the Mississippi at Louisiana, at which place I heard vague reports of the disturbances in the upper country, but nothing that could be relied on. I continued my course westward till I crossed Grand River at a place called Compton's Ferry, where I heard for the first time that if I proceeded any further on my journey, I would be in danger of being stopped by a body of armed men. I was not willing, however, while treading my native soil and breathing Republican air, to abandon my object, which was to locate myself and family in a fine, healthy country where we could enjoy the society of our friends and connections. Consequently, I prosecuted my journey till I came to Whitney's Mill, situated on the Shoal Creek, in the eastern part of Caldwell County. After crossing the creek and going about 3 miles, we met a party of the mob, about 40 in number, armed with rifles and mounted on horses, who informed us that we could go no further west, threatening us with instant death if we proceeded any further. I asked them the reason of this prohibition, to which they replied that we were Mormons, and that everyone who adhered to that religious faith would have to leave the state within 10 days, or renounce the religion. Accordingly, they drove us back to the mills above mentioned. Here we tarried 3 days, and on Friday the 26th, we again crossed the creek, following up its banks. We succeeded in eluding the mob for the time being, and gained the residence of a friend in Myers Settlement. On Sunday, October 28th, we arrived at Haun's Mill, where we found a number of our friends collected, who were holding a council and deliberating upon the best course for them to pursue to defend themselves against the mob that was collecting in the neighborhood under the command of Colonel Jennings of Livingston, and threatening them with house burning and killing. The decision of the council was that the neighborhood should put itself in a state of defense. Accordingly, about 28 of our men armed themselves and were in constant readiness for an attack if any small body of mobbers might come upon them. The same evening, for some reason best known to themselves, the mob sent one of their number to enter into a treaty with our friends, which was accepted on the condition of mutual forbearance on both sides, and that each party, as far as their influence extended, should exert themselves to prevent any further hostilities. At this time, however, there was another mob collecting on Grand River at William Mann's, which was threatening us. Consequently, we remained under arms on Monday, the 29th, which passed away without molestation from any quarter. On Tuesday the 30th, that bloody tragedy was enacted, the scenes of which I shall never forget. More than 3/4 of the day had passed in tranquillity, as smiling as the preceding one. I think there was no individual of our company that was apprised of the sudden and awful fate which hung over our heads like an overwhelming torrent, and which was to change the prospects, the feelings, and sympathies of about 30 families. The banks of Shoal Creek, on either side, teemed with children sporting and playing, while their mothers were engaged in domestic employment. Fathers or husbands were either on guard about the mills or other property, or employed in gathering crops for winter consumption. The weather was very pleasant, the sun shone clearly, all was tranquil, and no one expressed any apprehension of the awful crisis that was near us, even at our door. It was about 5:00 p.m. While sitting in my cabin with my babe in my arms and my wife standing by my side, the door being open, I cast my eyes on the opposite bank of Shoal Creek and saw a large body of armed men on horses directing their course toward the mills with all possible speed. As they advanced through the scattering trees that bordered the prairies, they seemed to form themselves into 3 square positions, forming a vanguard in front. At this moment, David Evans, seeing the superiority of their numbers, there being 240 of them according to their own count, gave a signal and cried for peace. This not being heeded, they continued to advance, and their leader, a man named Comstock, fired a gun, which was followed by a solemn pause of about 10 or 12 seconds, when all at once they discharged about 100 fires, aiming at a blacksmith's shop, into which our friends fled for safety. They then charged up to the shop, the crevice of which between the logs were sufficiently large to enable them to aim directly at the bodies of those who had there fled for refuge from the fire of their murderers. There were several families tended in the rear of the shop whose lives were exposed, and amid showers of bullets fled to the woods in different directions. After standing and gazing at this bloody scene for a few minutes and finding myself in the utmost danger, the bullets having reached the house where I was living, I committed my family to the protection of heaven, and leaving the house on the opposite side, I took a path which led up the hill, following in the trail of 3 of my brethren who had fled from the shop. While ascending the hill, we were discovered by the mob, who immediately fired at us and continued so to do till we reached the summit. In descending the hill, I secreted myself in a thicket of bushes, where I lay till 8 o'clock in the evening. At this time I heard a voice calling my name in an undertone. I immediately left the thicket and went to the house of Benjamin Lewis, where I found my family, who had fled there in safety, and 2 of my friends. Mortally wounded, one of whom died before morning. Here we passed the painful night, in deep and awful reflections of the scenes of the preceding evening. After daylight appeared, some 4 of 5 men and I, who had escaped with our lives from this horrid massacre, repaired as soon as possible to the mills to learn the condition of our friends, whose fate we had but too truly anticipated. When we arrived at the house of Mr. Hahn, we found Mr. Merrick's body lying in the rear of the house, Mr. McBride's in front, literally mangled from head to foot. We were informed by Miss Rebecca Judd, who was an eyewitness, that he was shot with his own gun after he had given it up, and then cut to pieces with a corn cutter by a man named Rogers of Davies County, who keeps a ferry on Grand River, and who has since repeatedly boasted of this act of savage barbarity. Mr. York's body we found in the house. After viewing these corpses, we immediately went to the blacksmith's shop, where we found 9 of our friends, 8 of whom were already dead, and other, Mr. Cox of Indiana, in the agonies of death, who soon expired. We immediately prepared and carried them to the place of interment. This last office of kindness, due to the remains of departed friends was not attended with the customary ceremonies nor decency, for we were in jeopardy every moment, expecting to be fired on by the mob who, we supposed, were lying in ambush, waiting the first opportunity to dispatch the remaining few who were providentially preserved from the slaughter of the preceding day. However, we accomplished without molestation this painful task. The place of burial was a vault in the ground, formerly intended for a well, into which we threw the bodies of our friends promiscuously. Among the slain, I will mention Sardius Smith, son of Warren Smith, about 9 years old, who through fear had crawled under the bellows of the shop, where he remained till the massacre was over, when he was discovered by one Glaze of Carroll County, who presented a rifle near his head and literally blew off the upper part of it. Mr. Stanley of Carroll County told me afterward that Glaze boasted of his fiend-like murder and heroic deed all over the county. The number killed and mortally wounded in this wanton slaughter was 18 or 19, whose names, as far as I can recollect, were as follows: Thomas McBride, Levi Merrick, Elias Benner, Josiah Fuller, Benjamin Lewis, Alexander Campbell, Warren Smith, Sardius Smith, George Richards, Mr. Napier, Mr. Harmer, Mr. Cox, Mr. Abbott, Mr. York, William Merrick, a boy 8 or 9 years old, and 3 or 4 others whose names I do not recollect, as they were strangers to me. Among the wounded who recovered were Isaac Laney, Nathan K. Knight, Mr. Yoakum, 2 brothers by the name of Myers, Tarleton Lewis, Mr. Hahn, and several others. Miss Mary Steadwell, while fleeing, was shot through the hand, and fainting, fell over a log, into which they shot upwards of 20 balls. To finish their work of destruction, this band of murderers, composed of men from Davies, Livingston, Ray, Corral, and Cherryton counties, led by some of the principal men of that section of the upper country, among whom I am informed were Mr. Ashby from Cherryton, member of the state legislature, Colonel Jennings of Livingston County, Thomas O'Brien, clerk of Livingston County, Mr. Whitney, Dr. Randall, and many others, proceeded to rob the houses, wagons, and tents of bedding and clothing, drove off horses and wagons, leaving widows and orphans destitute of necessities of life, and even stripped the clothing from the bodies of the slain. According to their own account, they fired 7 rounds in this awful butchery, making upwards of 1,600 shots at a little company of men, about 30 in number. I hereby certify the above to be a true statement of facts, according to the best of my knowledge. Joseph Young, State of Illinois, County of Adams. I hereby certify that Joseph Young this day came before me and made oath in due form of law that the statements contained in the foregoing sheets are true, according to the best of his knowledge and belief, in testimony whereof I have hereunto set my hand and affixed the seal of the Circuit Court at Quincy, this 4th day of June, in the year of our Lord 1839. C.M. Woods, Clerk of Circuit Court of Adams County, Illinois.
Chapter 25. Speech of Major General Clark, delivered at Far West while its citizens were held as prisoners, November 1838. Gentlemen, you whose names are not on this list will now have the privilege of going to your fields to obtain grain for your families, wood, etc. Those that compose the list will go from thence to prison, to be tried and receive the due demerits of their crimes, but you are now at liberty. All but such as charges may hereafter be preferred against. It now devolves upon you to fulfill the treaty that you have entered into, the leading items of which I now lay before you. The first of these items you have already complied with, which is that you deliver up your leading men to be tried according to law. Second, that you deliver up your arms. This has been attended to. The third is that you sign over your property to defray the expenses of the war. This you have also done. Another thing yet remains for you to comply with. That is, that you leave the state forthwith, and whatsoever your feelings concerning this affair, whatever your innocence, it is nothing to me. General Lucas, who is equal in authority with me, has made this treaty with you. I am determined to see it executed. The orders of the governor to me were that you should be exterminated and not allowed to remain in the state. And had your leaders not been given up, and the treaty complied with before this, you and your families would have been destroyed and your houses in ashes. There is a discretionary power resting in my hands, which I shall try to exercise for a reason. I did not say that you must go now, but you must not think of stopping here another season or of putting in crops. For the moment you do, the citizens will be upon you. I am determined to see the governor's orders fulfilled, but shall not come upon you immediately. Do not think that I shall act as I have done any more, but if I have to come again because the treaty which you have made is not complied with, you need not expect any mercy, but extermination. For I am determined that the governor's order shall be executed. As for your leaders, do not imagine for a moment, do not let it enter your mind that they will be delivered, or that you will see their faces again, for their fate is fixed. Their die is cast, their doom is sealed. I am sorry, gentlemen, to see so great a number of apparently intelligent men found in the situation that you are. And oh, that I could invoke the spirit of the unknown God to rest upon you and deliver you from that awful chain of superstition and liberate you from those fetters of fanaticism with which you are bound. I would advise you to scatter abroad and never again organize with bishops, presidents, etiquette, lest you excite the jealousies of the people and subject yourselves to the same calamities that have now come upon you. You have always been the aggressors. You have brought upon yourselves these difficulties by being disaffected and not being subject to rule. And my advice is that you become as other citizens, lest by a recurrence of these events you bring upon yourselves inevitable ruin. Chapter 26. I must not forget to state that when we arrived in Richmond as prisoners, There were some 50 others, mostly heads of families, who had been marched from Caldwell on foot, distance 30 miles, and were now penned up in a cold, open, unfinished courthouse, in which situation they remained for some weeks, while their families were suffering severe privations. The next morning, after our dialogue with General Clark, he again entered our prison and informed us that he had concluded to deliver us over to the civil authorities for an examining trial. He was then asked why he did not do away with the unlawful decree of banishment, which was first ordered by General Lucas in compliance with the governor's order, and which compelled thousands of citizens to leave the state, or upon what principle the military power aided the civil law against us, while at the same time it caused our families and friends to be murdered, plundered, and driven, contrary to all law. He replied that he approved of all the proceedings of General Lucas, and should not alter them. I make this statement because some writers have commended Clark for his heroic, merciful, and prudent conduct toward our society, and have endeavored to make it appear that Clark was not to be blamed for any of the measures of Lucas. The court of inquiry now commenced before Judge Austin A. King. This continued from the 11th to 28th of November, and our brethren, some 50 in number, were penned up in the cold, dreary courthouse. It was a very severe time of snow and winter weather, and we suffered much. During this time, Elder Rigdon was taken very sick from hardship and exposure, and finally lost his reason. But still, he was kept in a miserable, noisy, and cold room, and compelled to sleep on the floor with a chain and padlock around his ankle, and fastened to 6 others. Here he endured the constant noise and confusion of an unruly guard, the officer of which was Colonel Sterling Price, since governor of the state. These guards were composed generally of the most noisy, foul-mouthed, vulgar, disgraceful rabble that ever defiled the earth. While he lay in this situation, his son-in-law, George W. Robinson, the only male member of his family, was chained by his side. Thus, Mrs. Rigdon, and her daughters were left entirely destitute and unprotected. One of his daughters, Mrs. Robinson, a young and delicate female, with her little infant, came down to see her husband and to comfort and take care of her father in his sickness. When she first entered the room, amid the clank of chains and the rattle of weapons, and cast her eyes on her sick and dejected parent and sorrow-worn husband, she was speechless and only gave vent to her feelings in a flood of tears. This faithful lady, with her little infant, continued by the side of her father till he recovered from his sickness, until his fever and disordered mind resumed its wonted powers. In one of those tedious nights, we had lain as if in sleep till the hour of midnight had passed, and our ears and hearts had been pained while we had listened for hours to the obscene jests, the horrid oaths, the dreadful blasphemies, and filthy language of our guards, Colonel Price at their head, as they recounted to each other their deeds of rapine, murder, robbery, etiquette, which they had committed among the Mormons while at Far West and vicinity. They even boasted of defiling by force wives,
daughters, and virgins, and of shooting or dashing out the brains of men, women, and children. I had listened till I became disgusted, shocked, horrified, and so filled with the spirit of indignant justice that I could scarcely refrain from rising upon my feet and rebuking the guards, but had said nothing to Joseph or any one else, although I lay next to him and knew he was awake. On a sudden, he arose to his feet and spoke in a voice of thunder, or as the roaring lion, uttering, as near I can recollect, the following words: "Silence, ye fiends of the infernal pit! In the name of Jesus Christ, I rebuke you and command you to be still. I will not live another minute and bear such language. Cease such talk, or you or I die this instant." He ceased to speak. He stood erect in terrible majesty, chained and without a weapon, calm, unruffled, and dignified as an angel. He looked upon the quarreling guards, whose weapons were lowered or dropped to the ground, whose knees smote together, and who, shrinking into a corner or crouching at his feet, begged his pardon and remained quiet till a change of guards. I have seen the ministers of justice, clothed in magisterial robes, and criminals arraigned before them, while life was suspended on a breath in the courts of England. I have witnessed a congress in solemn session to give laws to nations. I have tried to conceive of kings, of royal courts, of thrones and crowns, and of emperors assembled to decide the fate of kingdoms, but dignity and majesty have I seen but once, as it stood in chains at midnight in a dungeon in an obscure village of Missouri. In this mock court of inquiry, the judge could not be prevailed on to examine the conduct of murderers and robbers who had desolated our society, nor would he receive testimony except against us by the dissenters and apostates who wished to save their own lives and secure their property at the expense of others, and by those who had murdered and plundered us from time to time. He obtained abundance of testimony, much of which was entirely false. Our church organization was converted by such testimony into a temporal kingdom, which was to fill the whole earth and subdue all other kingdoms. This court of inquisition inquired diligently into our belief of the 7th chapter of Daniel concerning the kingdom of God, which should subdue all other kingdoms and stand forever. And when told that we believed in that prophecy, the court turned to the clerk and said, "Write that down. It is a strong point for treason." Our lawyer observed as follows: Judge, you had better make the Bible treason. The court made no reply. Our lawyer observed as follows: Judge, you had better make the Bible treason. You had better make the Bible treason. The court made no reply. These texts and many others were inquired into with all the eagerness and apparent alarm that characterized a Herod of old in relation to the babe of Bethlehem, the King of the Jews. The ancient Herod, fearing a rival in the person of Jesus, issued his exterminating order for the murder of all children of Bethlehem from 2 years old and under, with a view to hinder the fulfillment of a prophecy which he himself believed to be true. The modern Herod, Boggs, fearing a rival kingdom in the people of the saints of the Most High,
issued his exterminating order for the murder of the young children of an entire people and of their mothers as well as fathers, while this court of inquisition inquired as diligently into the one prophecy as his predecessor did into the other. These parallel actions go to show a strong belief in the prophecies on the part of the actors in both cases. Both believed and feared and trembled. Both hardened their hearts against that which their better judgment told them was true. Both were instigated by the devil to cause innocent blood to be shed, and marvelously striking is the parallel in the final result of the actions of each. The one slew many young children, but failed to destroy the infant king of the Jews. The other slew many men, women, and children, but failed to destroy the kingdom of God. The one found a timely refuge in Egypt, the other in Illinois. Jesus Christ fulfilled his destiny and will reign over the Jews and sit on the throne of his father David forever. The saints are growing into power amid the strongholds of the mountains of Deseret, and will surely take the kingdom and the greatness of the kingdom under the whole heaven. Who can withstand the Almighty or frustrate his purposes? Herod died of a loathsome disease and transmitted to posterity his fame as a tyrant and murderer. And Lilburn W. Boggs is dragging out a remnant of existence in California with the mark of Cain upon his brow and the fear of Cain within his heart, lest he that findeth him shall slay him. He is a living stink, and will go down to posterity with the credit of a wholesale murderer. The court also inquired diligently into our missionary operations. It was found on investigation that the church had sent missionaries into England and other foreign countries. This, together with our belief in the Bible, was construed into treason against the state of Missouri, while every act of defense was set down as murder. The judge, in open court, while addressing a witness, proclaimed that if the members of the church remained on their lands to put in another crop, they should be destroyed indiscriminately and their bones left to bleach on the plains without a burial. Yes, reader, the cultivation of lands held by patents issued by the United States Land Office and signed by the President of the Republic was, by Judge Austin A. King, in open court, pronounced a capital offense, for which a whole community was prejudged and sentenced to death, while those who should be the instruments to execute this sentence were called by the dignified name of citizens, and these good citizens afterward elected the same judge for governor of the state. The judge inquired of the prisoners if they wished to introduce any witnesses for the defense. A list of names was supplied by the prisoners, when who should be selected to go to Far West to obtain and bring them before the court, but the identical bandit Bogart and his gang, who were defeated by us in the Battle of Crooked River after they had become famous for kidnapping, plundering, and murdering. Of course, every man in Caldwell would flee from such a gang if they could, but he succeeded in capturing a few of our friends whose names were on the list, and bringing them before the court, when instead of being sworn, they were immediately ordered to prison to take their trial. Others were sent for, and, as far as found, shared the same fate. This maneuver occupied several days, during which the court was still in session and the fate of the prisoners suspended.
At length the judge exclaimed to the prisoners, "If you have any witnesses, bring them forward. The court cannot delay forever. It has waited several days already." A member of the church named Allen was just then seen to pass the window. The prisoners requested that he might be introduced and sworn. He was immediately called in and sworn. He began to give his testimony, which went to establish the innocence of the prisoners and to show the murderers, robbers, etiquette committed by their accusers. But he was suddenly interrupted and cut short by cries of, "Put him out! Kick him out! Shoot him! Kill him! Kill him! He's a Mormon!" The court then ordered the guard to put him out, which was done amid the yells, threats, insults, and violence of the mob, who thronged in and around the courthouse. He barely escaped with his life. Mr. Donovan, attorney for the defense, and since famed as a general in the Mexican War, finally advised the prisoners to offer no defense, "For," said he, "though a legion of angels from the open heavens should declare your innocence, the court and populace have decreed your destruction." Our attorney offered no defense, and thus the matter of our trials was finally submitted. By the decision of this mock trial, some 20 or 30 of the accused were dismissed, among whom were Amos Luman Gibbs, Darwin Chase, Norman Shearer, and myself, and themselves, and Bale, and myself, and themselves, and Bale, but forced to leave the state, thus forfeiting the bail bonds. While Joseph Smith, Hiram Smith, Sidney Rigdon, Lehman White, Caleb Baldwin, and Alexander McRae, all heads of families, were committed to the jail of Clay County on the charge of treason, and Morris Phelps, Luman Gibbs, Darwin Chase, Norman Shearer, and I were committed to the jail of Richmond, Ray County, for the alleged crime of murder, said to be committed in the act of dispersing the bandit Bogart and his gang. This done, the civil and military authorities dispersed, and the troubled waters became a little more tranquil. As our people were compelled by the memorable Treaty of Far West to leave the state by the following spring, they now commenced moving by hundreds and by thousands to the state of Illinois, where they were received in the most humane and friendly manner by the authorities and by the citizens in general. In the meantime, bands of murderers, thieves, and robbers were roaming unrestrained among the unarmed and defenseless citizens, committing all manner of plunder and driving of cattle, sheep, and horses, abusing and insulting women. My wife and children soon came to me in prison, spent a portion of the winter in the cold, dark dungeon where I and fellow prisoners were frequently insulted and abused by our dastardly guards, who often threatened to shoot us on the spot, and who made murder, robbery, and whoredoms with Negro slaves their daily boast. Chapter 27. The state legislature was soon in session, and from this body, so high in responsibility, we had hoped for some redress and protection. Memorials and petitions from those aggrieved and others were addressed to the legislature, praying for an investigation of the whole matter and for redress and protection against the criminal proceedings of the governor and his troops in seizing our property, murdering our citizens, kidnapping our leaders, and others, and driving us from the state. Yes, in fact,
American citizens petitioned a Republican legislature for the privilege of occupying and cultivating their own lands, purchased of the government of the United States, and for the privilege of dwelling in the houses built by their own hands, on their own real estate. How strange, how incredible. In the 19th century, who can realize it? And yet it must stand on record and go down to posterity as a fact, a stubborn, undeniable public fact. The following extract of a petition addressed to the legislature of Missouri, dated December 10th, 1838, Far West, Caldwell County, Missouri, and signed by a committee appointed by the citizens, will show for itself the foregoing to be true. It was signed by Edward Partridge, Heber C. Kimball, John Taylor, Theodore Turley, John M. Murdoch, Brigham Young, Isaac Morley, George W. Harris, John Murdoch. It reads as follows. The last order of Governor Boggs to drive us from the state or exterminate us is a thing so novel, unlawful, tyrannical, and oppressive that we have been induced to draw up this memorial and present this statement of our case to your honorable body, praying that a law may be passed, rescinding the order of the governor to drive us from the state, and also giving us the sanction of this legislature to inherit our lands in peace. In laying our case before your honorable body, we say that we are willing, and ever have been, to conform to the Constitution and laws of the United States and of this state. We ask in common with others the protection of the laws. We ask for the privilege guaranteed to all free citizens of the United States and of this state to be extended to us, that we may be permitted to settle and live where we please and worship God according to the dictates of our own conscience without molestation. And while we ask for ourselves this privilege, we are willing all others should enjoy the same. If the necessity for such a petition seems strange, how much more strange appears the fact that such petition was denied by the legislature of a state. And to crown the whole, all investigation was utterly refused. Nay, more, the legislature itself became accessory to these crimes by appropriating $200,000 to pay the murderers and robbers for committing these crimes. This last act of outrage sealed with eternal infamy the character of the state of Missouri. She failed to rise no more. She should be looked upon by her sister states as a star fallen from the American constellation, a ruined and degraded outcast from the family of states. The whole civilized world will detest and abhor her as the most infamous of tyrants. Nay, tyranny itself will blush to hear her deeds mentioned in the annals of history. The cruelest persecutors of the Christians or reformers in pagan and papal Rome will start with astonishment from their long slumbers and with a mixture of envy and admiration. Yield to her palm. As a state, she has acted the part of a pirate, a wholesale murderer and robber. Every department, civil, military, executive, legislative, tramples all law underfoot and plunges into crime and blood. Many of the state journals have tried to hide the iniquity of the state by throwing a covering of lies over her atrocious deeds. But can they hide the governor's cruel order for extermination or banishment? Can they conceal the fact that the disgraceful treaty of the generals with a portion of their own officers and men at far west? Can they conceal the fact of the disgraceful treaty of the generals with a portion of their own officers and men at far west? Can they conceal the fact that 10 or 12,000 citizens of all ages and of both sexes have been banished from the state without trial or condemnation? Can they conceal the fact that the state legislature appropriated $200,000 to pay the criminals for committing these crimes, and this while the petitions of the sufferers lay on the table before them, praying for investigation, redress, and protection? Then can they conceal the fact that citizens have been kidnapped and imprisoned for many months, while their families, friends, and witnesses have been driven from the state? Can they conceal the blood of the murdered husbands and fathers, or stifle the cries of widows and orphans? Nay, the rocks and the mountains may cover them in unknown depths. The awful abyss of the fathomless deep may swallow them up, and still their horrid deeds will stand forth in the broad light of day for the wandering gaze of angels and of men. They cannot be hid. Chapter 28. This chapter is an extract from the statement of Hiram Smith, one of the prisoners, given under oath from the municipal court of the city of Nauvoo, Illinois, in the summer of 1843. The next morning after the close of this mock court, held at Richmond, Judge Austin A. King presiding, a large wagon drove up to the door of our prison house, and a blacksmith entered with some chains and handcuffs. He said his orders from the judge were to handcuff and chain us together. He informed us that the judge made out a mittimus and sentenced us to jail for treason. He also said that the judge had stated his intention to keep us in jail until all the Mormons were driven from the state, and that the judge had further stated that if he let us out before the Mormons had left the state, there would be another fuss kicked up. I myself also heard the judge say, while he was sitting in his pretended court, that there was no law for us or any of the Mormons in the state of Missouri, that he had sworn to see then exterminated, and to see the governor's order executed to the very letter, and he would do so. However, the blacksmith proceeded to put the irons upon us. We were then ordered into a wagon and drove off for Clay County. As we journeyed along the road, we were exhibited to the inhabitants. This public exhibition lasted until we arrived at the town of Liberty, Clay County. There we were thrust into prison again and locked up. We were held there in confinement for the space of 6 months. Our place of lodging was the square side of hewed white oak logs, and our food was anything but good and decent. Poison was administered to us 3 or 4 times. The effect it had upon our systems was that it vomited us almost to death, and then we would lie some 2 or 3 days in a torpid, stupid state, not even caring or wishing for life. The poison would inevitably have proved fatal had not the power of Jehovah interposed in our behalf to save us from their wicked purpose. We were also subjected to the necessities of eating human flesh for the space of 5 days, or go without food except a little coffee or a little cornbread. I chose the latter alternative. None of us partook of the flesh except Lyman White. We also heard the guard that was placed over us making sport of us, saying that they had fed us upon Mormon beef. I have described the appearance of this flesh to several experienced physicians, and they have decided that it was human flesh. We learned afterward through one of the guards that it was supposed that such acts of cannibalism as feeding us with human flesh would be considered a popular deed, but those concerned on learning that it would not take tried to keep it secret. But the fact was noised abroad before they took that precaution. While we were incarcerated in prison, we petitioned the Supreme Court of the state of Missouri for habeas corpus twice, but we were as often refused by Judge Reynolds, who is now governor of the state. We also petitioned one of the county judges for a writ of habeas corpus. This was granted in about 3 weeks afterward, but we were not permitted to have any trial. We were only taken out of jail and kept out for a few hours and then remanded back again. In the course of 3 or 4 days after that time, Judge Turnham came into the jail in the evening and said he had permitted Mr. Rigdon to get bail, but said he had to do it in the night, and had also to get away in the night, and unknown to any of the citizens, or they would kill him, for they had sworn to kill him if they could find him. And as to the rest of us, he dared not let us go for fear of his own life, as well as ours. He said it was hard to be confined under such circumstances, for he knew we were innocent men. And the people also knew it, and that it was only precaution and treachery, and the scenes of Jackson County acted over again, for fear we would become too numerous in that upper country. He said the plan was concocted from the governor down to the lowest judge, that wicked Baptist priest Riley was riding into town every day to watch the people, stirring up the minds of the people against us all he could, exciting them and stirring up their religious prejudices against us, for fear they would let us go. Mr. Rigdon, however, got bail and made his escape to Illinois. The jailer, Samuel Tillery, told us also that the whole plan was concocted from the governor down to the lowest judge in that upper country early and the previous spring, and that the plan was more fully matured at the time General Atchison went down to Jefferson County with Generals Wilson, Lucas, and Gillum. This was sometime in September, when the mob was collected at DeWitt. He also said that the governor was now ashamed enough of the whole transaction and would be glad to set us at liberty if he dared to do it. But, said he, you need not be concerned, for the governor has laid a plan for your release. He also said that Mr. Birch, the state's attorney, was appointed to be circuit judge in the district including Daviess County, and that he, Birch, was instructed to fix the papers so that we would be clear from any encumbrance in a very short time. Sometime in April, we were taken to Daviess County, as they said, to have a trial. But when we arrived at the place, instead of finding a court or a jury, we found another inquisition, and Birch, who was the district attorney, the same man who was one of the court-martial when we were sentenced to death,
was now the circuit judge of that pretended court, and the grand jury that was impaneled was at the massacre at Hans Mill, and lively actors in that awful, solemn, disgraceful, cold-blooded murder. All the pretense they made of excuse was they had done it because the governor ordered it done. The same jury sat as a jury in the daytime, and were over us as guards by night. They tantalized and boasted over us of their great achievements at Hans Mill and at other places, telling us how many houses they had burned, and how many sheep, cattle, and hogs they had driven off belonging to the Mormons, and how many rapes they had committed. These fiends of the lower region boasted of these acts of barbarity and tantalized our feelings with them for 10 days. We had heard of these acts of cruelty previous to this time, but we were slow to believe that such acts had been perpetrated. This grand jury constantly celebrated their achievement with grog and glass in hand, like the Indian warriors at the war dances, singing and telling each of their exploits in murdering the Mormons, in plundering their houses, and carrying off their property. And all this in the presence of Judge Birch, who had previously said in our hearing that there was no law for the Mormons in the state of Missouri. After all these 10 days of drunkenness, we were informed that we were indicted for treason, murder, larceny, theft, and stealing. We asked for a change of venue from that country to Marion County, but they would not grant it. But they gave us a change of venue from Davies to Boone County, and a mittimus was made out by the pretended Judge Birch, without date, name, or place. They fitted us with a 2-horse wagon and horses and 4 men, besides the sheriff, to be our guard. There were 5 of us. We started from Gallatin, the sun about 2 hours high, p.m., and went as far as Diamond that evening, and stayed till morning. There we bought 2 horses of the guard, and paid for one of them in clothing which we had with us, and for the other we gave our note. We went down that day as far as Judge Morin's, a distance of some 4 or 5 miles. There we stayed until morning, when we started on our journey to Boone County, and traveled about 20 miles. There was bought a jug of whiskey, of which the guard drank freely. While there, the sheriff showed us the mittimus before referred to, without date or signature, and said that Judge Birch told him never to carry us to Boone County, and to show the mittimus, and, said he, I shall take a good drink of grog and go to bed, and you may do as you have mind to. 3 others of the guard drank pretty freely of whiskey sweetened with honey. They also went to bed, and were soon asleep. The other guard went with us and helped us to saddle our horses. 2 of us mounted the horses, and the other 3 started on foot, and thus we took our change of venue for the state of Illinois. In the course of 9 or 10 days we arrived safely in Quincy Adams County, where we found our families in a state of poverty, although in good health. They, having been driven out of the state previously by the murderous militia under the exterminating order of the executive of Missouri, and now the people of that state, or a portion of them, would be glad to make the people of this state believe that my brother Joseph has committed treason,
and this they seek to do for the purpose of keeping up their murderous and hellish persecution. They seem to be unrelenting in thirsting for the blood of innocents, for I do know most positively that my brother Joseph has committed no treason, nor violated one solitary item of law or rule in the state of Missouri. But I do know that the Mormon people were driven out of that state after being robbed of all they had, and that he barely escaped with his life, and all this in consequence of the exterminating order of Governor Boggs, the same being confirmed by the legislature of that state. And I do know, so does this court and every rational man who is acquainted with the circumstances, and every man who shall hereafter become acquainted with the particulars thereof will know, that Governor Boggs and General Clark Lucas Wilson and Generals Clark, Lucas, Wilson, and Gillum, also Austin A. King, have committed treasonable acts against the citizens of Missouri, and did violate the Constitution of the United States, and also the Constitution and laws of the state of Missouri, and did exile and expel at the point of the bayonet some 12 or 14,000 inhabitants of the state, and did murder some 300 or 400 of men, women, and children in cold blood in the most horrid and cruel manner possible. And the whole of it was caused by religious bigotry and persecution, and because the Mormons dared to worship Almighty God according to the dictates of their own conscience and agreeably to his divine will, as revealed in the scriptures of eternal truth, and had turned away from following the vain traditions of their fathers, and would not worship according to the dogmas and commandments of those men who preached for hire and divine for money, and teach for doctrines the commandments of men, expecting that the Constitution of the United States would have protected them therein. But notwithstanding the Mormon people had purchased upwards of $200,000 worth of land, most of which was entered and paid for at the land office in the United States, in the state of Missouri, and although the President of the United States has been made acquainted with these facts and the particulars of our persecutions and oppressions by petitioning to him and to Congress, yet they have not even attempted to restore the saints to their rights, or given any assurance that we may hereafter expect redress from them. And I do also know most positively and assuredly that my brother Joseph Smith has not been in the state of Missouri since the spring of the year 1839, and further, this deponent saith not. Hiram Smith. Chapter 29. On the 17th of March, 1839, my wife took leave of the prison with her little children, and with a broken heart turned to Far West in order to get passage with some of the brethren from Illinois. She tarried in Far West a month. All the society had gone from the state, but a few of the poor and widows of the community that tarried behind to assist them in removing. Among the middle of April, a gang of robbers entered Far West, armed, and ordered my wife and the committee and others to be gone by such a time, or they would murder them. This gang destroyed much furniture and other property. Thus my wife was driven away according to the governor's previous order, while I was still detained in a filthy dungeon. My family was conveyed to Quincy, Illinois, distance 280 miles, by David W. Rogers of New York, who is a descendant of the celebrated martyr John Rogers of Smithfield, Celebrity, England. On the 20th of April, 1839, the last of the society departed from far west. Thus had a whole people, variously estimated at from 10 to 15,000 souls, been driven from houses and lands and reduced to poverty, and had removed to another state during one short winter and a part of a spring. The sacrifice of property was immense, including houses, lands, cattle, sheep, hogs, agricultural implements, furniture, household utensils, clothing, money, and grain. One of the most flourishing counties in the state, and part of several others, were reduced to desolation, or inhabited only by marauding gangs of murderers and robbers. On the 24th of April, our cases came before the grand jury of the county of Ray, which grand jury, the reader is aware, would be naturally composed to our persecutors and their accessories, and at whose head was the same Judge King, who had presided in the former mock trial and inquisition that committed us to prison. Darwin Chase, Norman Shearer were dismissed after being in prison nearly 6 months. This release happened just as Mr. Shearer came to visit his son for the last time before he left the county. He came into the prison and took an affectionate leave of his son, who wept as if his heart would break. But while he yet lingered in town, his son was called before the court, and, together with Mr. Chase, was told that he might go at liberty. The father and son then embraced each other, almost overcome with joy, and departed. At the same time, my brother Orson Pratt, whom I had not seen for years, came from Illinois to see me, but was only permitted to visit me for a few moments, and then was ordered to depart. Mr. Phelps, who had waited in prison for some days in hopes that the court would release her husband, Mrs. Phelps, would release her husband, now parted with him, overwhelmed with sorrow and tears, and with her infant went away to remove to Illinois. Thus our families wandered in a strange land, without a protection, being robbed of house and home. O Lord, how long? Our number in prison was now reduced to 4, one having been added about the middle of April. His name was King Follett. He was dragged from his distressed family just as they were leaving the state, being charged with robbery, which meant that he was one of a posse who took a keg of powder from a gang of ruffians who were out against the Mormons. Thus all the Mormon prisoners were kidnapped, only to remain in the state. Mr. Gibbs having denied the faith to try to regain liberty. These were Morris, Phelps, and myself. All who were liberated on bail were forced to leave the state together with those who bailed them, thus forfeiting many thousands of dollars to the coffers of the state. Is it possible? Have I been recording the history of realities as the scenes transpired in the broad light of the 19th century in the boasted land of liberty, and in the most renowned republic now existing on the globe? Alas, it is too true. Would to God it were a dream, a novel, a romance that had no existence save in the wild regions of fancy, but the prison door yet grating on its hinges, the absence of my wife and little ones, the gloom of the dungeon where I yet repose. These and 10,000 other things cause me to think that my almost incredible narrative is no fiction, but an awful reality, a fact more truly distressing than my feeble tongue or pen can find words to set forth. How often in my sleeping visions I see my beloved wife or my playful children surrounded with the pleasures of home in my sweet little cottage, or walk with them in some pleasant grove or flowery field, as in years past, how often I see myself surrounded with listening thousands, as in bygone years, and join with them in the sacred song of prayer, or address them with the sound of the everlasting gospel. But alas, I soon awake, and, to my inexpressible grief and sorrow, find myself still in my lonely dungeon. O liberty, O sound once delightful to every American ear, O sacred privilege of American citizenship, once sacred, now trampled underfoot. When shall I and my injured family and friends again enjoy thy sweets? When shall we repose beneath the bower, or bask in thy boundless ocean of felicity? When shall we sit again under our vine and under our fruit trees, and worship our God, with none to molest or make afraid? Awake, O Americans! Arise, O sons and daughters of freedom! Restore a persecuted and injured people to their rights of citizenship of a free republic. Down with tyranny and oppression, and rescue your liberties from the brink of ruin. Redeem your much injured country from the awful stain upon its honor, and let the cries of helpless orphans and the tears of sorrowing widows cease to ascend up before the Lord for vengeance upon the heads of those who have slain, plundered, imprisoned, and driven the saints. And let the news go forth to the wandering nations that Columbia still is free. Oh, tell it not to Britain, nor let the sound be heard in Europe that liberty is fallen, that the free institutions of our once happy country are now destroyed, lest the sons and daughters of Britannia rejoice and laugh us to scorn, lest the children of monarchy triumph and have us in derision. O freedom, must thy spirit now withdraw from earth, returning to its native heaven, there to dwell, till armed with sevenfold vengeance, it comes again to earth with King Messiah and all his marshaled hosts in glory bright, to tread the winepress of Almighty God, and none escape? Yea, powers of heaven, forbid. Let freedom linger still on shores of time, and in the breasts of thine afflicted saints. Let it find a peaceful retirement, a place of rest, till o'er the troubled earth, mercy, justice, and eternal truth, while journeying hand in hand to exalt the humble and debase the proud, shall find some nation, poor, oppressed, afflicted, and despised, cast out and trodden under foot of tyrants, proud, the hiss, the byword, and the scorn of knaves. And there let freedom's spirit wide prevail, and grow and flourish mid the humble poor, exalted and enriched by virtue, knowledge, temperance, and love, till o'er the earth Messiah comes to reign, the proud consumed, no more oppress the poor. Let freedom's eagle then, forthcoming like the dove from Noah's ark, on lofty pinions soar, and spread its wide domain from end to end, o'er all the vast expanse of this wide earth, while freedom's temple rears its lofty spires amid the skies, and on its bosom rests a cloud by day and flaming fire by night. But stay, my spirit, though thou fain wouldest soar on high, mid scenes of glory, peace, and joy, from bondage free, and bid thy jail farewell. Stop, wait a while, let patience have her perfect work. Return again to suffering scenes, through which the way to glory lies, and speak of things around thee. Thou art in prison still, but spring has now returned, and wintry blasts have ceased to howl through the prison crevices. The soft and gentle breeze of the south are whistling gaily past, and incense sweet on Zephyr's wing with fragrance fills the air, wafted from blooming flowers of the spring, while around my lonely dungeon oft is heard melodious strains, as if the birds of spring in anthems sweet conspire to pity and console the drooping spirits there confined. All things around me show that days and weeks and months have fled, although to me not marked by Sabbaths, and but faintly marked by dim and somber rays of light alternate mid the gloom of overhanging night, which still pervades my dear and solitary cell. Where now these helpless ones I left to mourn? Where now these helpless ones I left to mourn? Have they perished? No. What then? Has some Elijah called and found them in the last extreme, and multiplied their meal and oil? Yes, verily, the Lord has filled the hearts of his poor saints with everlasting love, which, in proportion to their poverty, increased with each increasing want, till all reduced into the widow's mite, and then, like her, their living they put in, and thus overflowed the treasury of the Lord with more abundant stores than all the wealth of kings. And thus supported, fed and clothed, and moved from scenes of sorrow to a land of peace, they live, and living still, they do rejoice in tribulation deep, well knowing their redemption draweth nigh.